no one had been robbed.
Right.
At all.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait a minute. This violates some very core economic theory. This violates the Nash equilibrium. I've seen few places as hospitable as Uzbekistan. There is a big optics problem. We see a large booming group of coders and programmers. Effectively, their parents are going to make sure they take that job offer from KPMG. Cerebra. Right. Cerebra is a company AI stroke detection, which has gotten some traction in America. I would say, just start. Right. Just do it.
I mean, at the backdrop of the myriad of opportunities available for the startup ecosystem of Uzbekistan, the awareness-raising campaigns are minuscule compared to what is in other regions.
It's crazy because the official efforts to raise Uzbekistan's profiles probably aren't the most effective use of funds, but there are some private entities and individuals doing an amazing job.
I agree.
I mean, Kian, like we talked about, Dario. So I advised them a bit on their magazine strategy, and what the strategy they're pursuing that I think has a good chance of working out is that rather than going over abroad and trying to advertise Uzbekistan directly, because that is a very difficult and time-consuming thing to do.
Exactly.
Right, because I see pictures of government officials, on road shows with signs saying "Buy Uzbekistan," and the audience is just looking at them very confusedly. And so the approach that Dario is approaching with Silicon Steps, the name I've actually suggested that name, is that rather than trying to approach foreign media players or foreign media partners to say, hey, advertise the stands, right? Which is, honestly has terrible optics. What they're trying to do instead is that we will consolidate or at least be a center of information about the entrepreneurship scene, like a TechCrunch, like what TechCrunch did for California. And what they can do is let's say we find a company like say Cerebra. All right, Cerebra is a company AI stroke detection, which has gotten some traction in America. Right, so rather than say, go to a foreign media player and say, look at the stands or look at Central Asia, say, hey, okay, your audience is covering the medical field or medical tech, right? Look at this incredible company that's being used at Cedars-Sinai. Right, and they're actually being invested in by some friends of mine, Big Sky Capital. They do a fantastic job, and essentially, instead of like the hook there is your audience cares about stroke detection and AI, right? So look at this incredible company, do a little profile of this company, and by the way, they're from Central Asia, right? Do you guys want to hear more about us, right? Because we're doing a lot of cool things. And that way, the media player says, "Oh, wait, this can actually get eyeballs. I can actually make money off this." Whereas if you come to me and say, advertise Uzbekistan, I'm going to say, none of my readers will understand what that topic is, and I won't be able to make any advertising revenue.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a slow sideways path into that media market, and I think it's a much better approach. And so I think, so what they're working on now is they're looking at all the top, the companies that have caught the most traction across Central Asia. They're doing profiles. They're looking at key players in the industry, and trying to create a cohesive thesis, if you will, on why technology in Central Asia is something that international audiences should take a look at, which I think is something completely deservedly true. Right, because there is immense potential and talent here that is just the external market is just essentially completely blind of, right? Just completely ignorant of, right? Where I've talked to foreign investors, and I asked them like, hey, what's the best way to pitch this, right? The market doesn't understand this. The market doesn't know this, right? How do we get past the superficial, I guess, image or superficial stereotype of the region, right? Because like if I call a random American and I say Uzbekistan, and they ask, oh, like Afghanistan, like is it safe to go there? Like are you afraid of being kidnapped? and I'm like ugh, oh bother, right? And it's an education problem. It's an informational problem, right? One, I mean, I hate the fact that it's true, but and as an American, my geography is horrible, right? Last time I took geography was when I was about 11, right? and our sense of geography is objectively terrible. But at the same time, right? How do we break this image? How do we break this stereotype, right? In a way that is practical and cost effective. Right, because if we had $1 billion that we could throw at at advertising agencies, okay, we could solve that problem. But how do we do this in a more effective way, in a more entrepreneurial way, right? How do we attack it from the sides? So I think Dadio and the Silicon Steps, their new magazine, is a really good way, and I wish they got the support that they deserve. Because they're essentially doing Uzbekistan and Central Asia a huge favor, right? Because their magazine is targeted towards English readers, translated to Russian and Uzbek. But the thing is to try to show the reality of what Central Asia is, as opposed to the unfortunate stereotypes that currently exist. And yeah, I think if one thing I love about this market is that it is incredibly collaborative. Everyone understands that if we are to grow into the potential that is actually here, everyone needs to look past short-term competition and work together to address the structural needs of the industry. And for example, I have competitors who are both my advisors. And they're both incredibly generous to my entrepreneurs, the entrepreneurs that we form. And if these market players were more short-sighted, right? My program wouldn't be possible, right? But everyone recognizes the challenges that we face, and everyone comes together. So one of the things that I found fascinating about Uzbekistan. And I have an interesting perspective about this because I kind of come from the opposite end of late stage capitalism, is that I'm incredibly impressed by how fundamentally decent and collaborative everyone is here. I ran a networking event yesterday, or a networking exercise yesterday for my entrepreneurs, and I've done this in multiple countries. And the results were completely not what I expected. Right, so I ran an event that is based on the prisoner's dilemma, right, an idea in game theory, right, where what happens is that and you ever see a movie called A Beautiful Mind? It's all about this particular theory, the Nash equilibrium. But essentially, what it is that I present a situation where two players have the choice to either to cooperate, right, to split, or to steal, or to try to cheat each other, right? And what this equilibrium model says is that, generally speaking, both parties will try to cheat the other, because neither party can establish trust. In other words, party A says, party B, right, we'd make more money, right, if we both cooperated. But I also know that party B could make more money if I cooperated and he cheated, right? A classic prisoner's dilemma, right? And what happens is that the theory states is that both parties will inevitably cheat the other, because both parties understand the opposite interest is to not trust, right? And so the way I use this in networking, because the goal of this networking exercise is actually to teach the value of reputation, right? Because I show a short video where this scenario is played out, right? Two people have the choice to cheat each other, right? And the person who quote unquote wins takes all the money. It's from a British game show, right? You have a big tough man, right? A small innocent looking girl, and and the big tough man is left crying, and the innocent girl leaves with all the money. And I showed this video, and I tell the group that everyone is going to play the same game. All right. And what happens is each person has a piece of paper. They find a partner. I run a timer, and each person, right? They look away from each other, write down what they either split or they steal, and then they show the other person what they did. All right. And according to what happens, I pay real money to the person who won the game. All right. And now the surprise is that then immediately after the first round, I then tell the entire group that wait, there's more. We are actually playing 5 rounds of this game, except there's a new rule, and the new rule is that before each round, you must show the other person your transaction history, your history of splitting or stealing. All right, and that immediately changes the dynamics of the game. Right, what happens is that your piece of paper with your split or steal record is essentially your reputation.
Wow.
Right, and that's the exercise I run in multiple countries. Now this is the first time this has ever happened, right? Where I ran the game for the first round, and I looked around what happens, because what normally happens after the first round, right, is about half the class, right, roughly half the class, like throws up their hands and they're shocked because they've been robbed, and the other person's laughing, ha ha ha, right, and I was dumbfounded because after the first round, everyone was perfectly quiet, and no one had been robbed.
Right.
At all.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait a minute. This violates some very core economic theory. This violates the Nash equilibrium.
Right.
Right? Because this is a classic prisoner's dilemma. And what is supposed to happen is that neither party can establish trust without reputation. And the first round, right, should be where a big chunk of the population, right, is shocked and appalled and can't believe they've been cheated. But it didn't work here, right? It did not work in Uzbekistan.
Wow.
And this was with a completely, this was a true test, right? This was a group of people who did not know each other, right? This was not a rigged game. This was a genuine sample of the society here, and it was. I'm like, wow, this is like some sociologists should look at this, because this has never happened before. If I run that example in Asia and other countries, right, and the results have always been fairly predictable, right. I've never had this result before, right, and I says that's something very unique about Uzbekistan. All right, and because I've been asked this question before, where people ask me, what do you find striking about Uzbekistan? Because people say, oh, the nightlife isn't that great here, right? It seems to be a very reserved place, and I'm like, well, it's Tashkent is a very multi-layered city. It's like a pie with different fillings at different layers, and in order to appreciate it, you do need to spend some time here and dig a little deeper, and so and I also say it's a really fascinating market. And the way I describe it to some entrepreneur friends back home is that it's nice capitalism, right? It's not late stage capitalism. It's early stage capitalism where people are generally quite nice about it. And that's what takes me aback about this market. And it's also, and coming from the opposite end of the spectrum, it's actually quite a relief in a way. You don't generally have to be like many of the things that you're on guard about, right? Isn't something you need to quite worry about here. And so, it's funny because the pictures I take in Uzbekistan are generally, I don't know what that says about me, but are generally not typical tourist pictures, right? The pictures I send to my friends back home are like of vending machines, right? Because one thing I've always said, throughout my career is that markets can be wrong, but they never lie, right? If there's a buyer, it means they believe in the product. It means they believe in what they're doing. And business models, whether they're feasible or not, tell you a lot about the society. So one thing I came across was a vending machine that is unlike any vending machine I've ever seen, right? It's literally a refrigerator with a box of cash, right? And essentially, the business model is that everyone will, right? There's goods in the refrigerator, there's prices underneath the goods, and everyone will just put in however much cash it costs to buy that good, and then take the good out. And I'm like, what? Okay, this works, right? The amount of the amount of civic trust you need, or the amount of civic responsibility for that business model to be viable and to be profitable, is flabbergasting. Like, for example, if you walk into a Walmart or a CVS in bad parts of Los Angeles now, everything is behind a lock, behind a plexiglass screen and a lock, right? Because the shrinkage problem is just that bad. That the robbery problem is just that bad, right? Right. It's gone to the point where many stores are closing. Whereas here, right, I was talking to a friend about this, another entrepreneur, a local entrepreneur about this. He's like, "Oh, no, it doesn't say that much, right? Like, they have cameras." I'm like, well, if you put the same thing in a bad part of LA, right, the food would be gone, the cash would be gone, the refrigerator would be gone, and so would be the camera, right? Right? None of it would be left, right? And in order to address these security needs, these security concerns, right? Like if you did this in the States, you'd have to take steps. You'd have to put security systems. You'd have to have processes for ensuring things got replenished and got things right. You'd have to factor in a shrinkage variable, right? Whereas here, I'm like, oh, that just works. So the market itself, the actual market, is great, right? Because you have a population that respects rules of behavior, right? Now there are other aspects that are much more difficult, right? Some regulatory issues, outdated policies. I've had enormous headaches with local banks and receiving funds. But that's also part of emerging market risk, because whenever, like, I'm a fairly experienced traveler, but even I was surprised by a lot of things. And the part of emerging market risk is that, everyone has certain assumptions about how the way things work, right? Because you can't really describe, like if I ask someone, make a list of everything you assume about life, right? You can't really make that list. Right. You can't really, you don't really know what's different until you're actually in the environment and something hits you on the head. Right. And then something is different, and you can't, like, it's the unknown unknowns. And then because you didn't know them, you didn't have experience with them, right? You have to scramble to fix it after the fact. But that's natural for any country. That's natural for any emerging market. And essentially, you learn that from experience, and hopefully you write it down so other people can learn too.
Yeah. I welcome you all to the inaugural RS Podcast Specials English edition. My name is Abdulkarim Kadirov, the Investments Director at Realsoft. For our inaugural special edition, we have invited a special guest, Stephen Lin, one of the founding partners of Swift Launch in partnership with Sturgeon Capital.
Yes.
Right. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you so much. And thank you, RS Podcast, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. Let's start with a simple question. What brings you to Uzbekistan, first and foremost?
Oh my gosh, it is quite a story. I never expected to be in Uzbekistan. And to be frank, it was a long series of unlikely events. However, I am very glad and very fortunate to be here. I'm glad to be here. My story, the relevant parts of the story starts about 10 years ago. I had just gotten my MBA from the University of Southern California, and I was invited to give a seminar to an oil company in Almaty, Kazakhstan. it's supposed to be a 3-week seminar, and I was pitched, hey, it'll be a workation, explore a new country, and where I'd worked abroad before, and I've traveled quite a bit, but I only expected to be in Central Asia for about 3 weeks, but 3 weeks somehow became 3 years, and I discovered a market and countries and cultures that were just completely beyond what I expected. And I honestly planned to stay there indefinitely because I was just enjoying my time and I was building really cool things. And I expected to stay there, just on a continual basis. Unfortunately, some family matters intruded, and I actually had to go back to America. And in America, I worked for a large corporation, IT policy, IT implementation, innovation policy, and also did another startup in Nevada as well. Very fortunately, I was then invited to come to Uzbekistan. And at this point, I was feeling okay. I had an amazing venture last time, and I think that I could use another venture and see what amazing things I could find in Central Asia. So I spent about 1 year just kind of exploring this market, testing a methodology for training startups, and I was really pleasantly surprised by what I found, because I found a market and an ecosystem where all of the ingredients you need for a vibrant startup ecosystem is present here, and was actually more advantages than even the locals would realize. I would say, you have incredibly talented people, and you have a sense of community and a sense of a culture of helpfulness, which is a Y Combinator term, where people really help each other. And I've noticed that in Swift Launch as well, because in my program, right, we depend on the cooperation of a lot of different people, some of whom are competitors. And it's this cooperation that allows us to be so effective in the creation of new teams and in the creation of new startups. Without it, this model simply wouldn't be possible.
What were your first impressions of the Uzbek startup space? The first things that struck your kind of mind when you first encountered this market?
With this market, it's how to explain it? Because a former business partner was actually exploring another market at the same time. I was exploring Uzbekistan. But both of us come from kind of the opposite end of late stage capitalism, right? Where everything, we work in online businesses. Everything is relentlessly optimized, right? Everything is hyper competitive. And when I got here, right, the way I would describe it is that this is Uzbekistan is in a stage of friendly capitalism, right, where everyone makes money by creating value and then splitting that value, right? Wealth is created as opposed to competed and transferred. And that is something that really stands out to me here. And I also saw that a lot of people seems to focus on the surface of things, and it's not good or bad, in the sense that like for example, you won't see huge conventions, right, with flashy shows and big PR. But to be frank, that's not really important. The things, the substance of things that I think that are important is that you have a great pool of talented young people who have the vision and the drive to try and think new things. And you have a lot of different pieces of the ecosystem that all really want to help each other, right? The missing ingredient, so to speak, is that these pieces need to be I guess put together in a cohesive way.
Right. Yes, that takes me to the next question. I just want to ask take a perspective on the gaps that you've noticed in the market.
Oh gosh, a lot of different factors, but I think they're all fairly addressable, and in fact, many of them are being addressed as we speak. For example, like if you're in California, right? And so one example I give is Point AI, right? Two very talented university students met together at a hackathon, and then afterwards they won the hackathon, and afterwards they weren't sure what to do. But despite that, they persevered, created an AI company that gives, helps automate and improve the customer experience for corporations. They're actually working with a telecom company now in a trial, and they're showing incredible results, right? 200,000 users, right? On telecoms, drastically increasing customer satisfaction rates at drastically lowered costs. And I was thinking, if this happened, at Berkeley or Stanford, or, this happened, at a university in California, these two young people would be celebrities, right? They would be hailed as heroes, right? They'd be getting on media, right? They'd be shown as aspirational, right? And so, because there's an information architecture there, right? There's TechCrunch, right? There's a way for news about these achievements and startups to be concentrated and distributed, so that the community can respond, right? And that that other young people will say, wow, look what they did, right? I want to do that too. Whereas here, right, you just have to have the right personal network to have heard of them in the first place, right? Because there's no centralized information clearinghouse. But I know media companies here who are working on this very problem right now, and I think they're going to do a fantastic job. So that's one component that is still a little undeveloped.
Right.
Okay.
If I may ask, the funding gap that is widely, I'd say it's pretty widespread issue regardless of a location or geography. But
Yes.
Uzbekistan, it's more pronounced in Uzbekistan
Yes.
because of a lack of awareness, as far as I understand. So, the funding gap is.
Oh gosh.
Is that because? What fundamental reasons do you see behind that problem?
Oh gosh. Okay, so I'll step on a little thinner ice here. There are two sides of this problem, and the funding gap and the financing here is particularly bad in Uzbekistan, which on one hand is a problem, but on the other hand serves as potential opportunity for investors. The two sides is that, one, there's a severe lack of it. Right. This is, I've worked in 6-7 countries, and the Uzbekistan in particular is probably the most capital-starved country I have ever seen. And I know there are efforts to increase FDI, but there are structural issues with that as well. Right. Primarily, a lot of FDI right now is just one Chinese company building one Chinese mine, right? There's no infrastructure or no real external marketplace to allocate capital. The other issue is that the finance sector in most most modern markets is what I would call a pillar industry. The success of that industry allows the success of others, and this industry is, I think, in many ways hamstrung by the legacy of the country's past, right? Previous government's models, previous regulatory models, and it's a very difficult problem for them, because right now what I tend to see is that sources of capital do not flow according to market principles. They generally flow to, say, they either go through, say relational models, or say highly bureaucratic or highly overly processed procedures. One example for I would say is, a startup team might apply for a grant, and this process would take at least 1 year, which for a startup is an eternity.
Yes.
Right. By the time they get that money is no longer applicable. Right. The opportunity has long passed. About 10 months ago. And the problem is, of course, is that team had to create an incredibly detailed business plan. And business plans for startups have been outdated for 20 years, right? No one uses formal business plans for startups anymore because, it's completely inapplicable to reality, right? If I make a business plan that details my spending a year from now, when I don't know where that revenue will come from 6 months from now, the assumptions that I make, right? If they're wrong next month, the pages 3 to 100 of that business plan is now completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right. So requiring an entrepreneur to make that business plan in the first place is essentially taking away his time and focus from building company to making an imaginary document.
Right.
So that's just one example of how funding here is generally misallocated.
Right. That takes us to the other side of the equilibrium. The quality of the teams and the quality of ideas and quality of processes that create the successful startups that we all want to achieve. So that the other side of equilibrium, which is also a part of the problem, is a part of the problem in funding gap, is the lack of good ideas or the lack of good implementation or action on good ideas. So I just want to have your perspective on that issue as well.
The ideas. So I tell young people here that yes, things are unfair for you in many ways, right? Like your salary, right? Your educational, your educational access, etc. Right? No one said life is fair, but simultaneously, due to the internet and due to the accessibility of information, and due to the existing infrastructure online, you are also simultaneously like one of the luckiest generations ever, because you have the ability to create a product here, right, at stunningly low cost. And at the same time, the internet gives you access to the entire globe as your market, right? No generation before this had that kind of opportunity. And so the ideas are starting to penetrate, right? We have surprisingly, shockingly sophisticated young people who grew up on the internet with exposure to these ideas. And they still need advice and they still need experience, yes, but like I said earlier, the core ingredient is there. In terms of processes and management processes, that there is a distinct lack in that. For example, I've noticed during my time here that a lot of organizations are run in a fairly ad hoc process, right, by individuals and not by process, right? To get something done within an organization, you need to find not just the right department, but the right person at the department. And, should that person leave the organization, that organization no longer has that capability, right? So in terms of management structure, in terms of repeatable or systemizing a process, that kind of thinking is starting to grow, but still at a very early stage.
Right. Bridging the gap between the founders and the funding side of equilibrium, what engagement models would you recommend to the new startup ecosystem players of Uzbekistan?
Oh gosh. Well, with swift launch, essentially, right. Our program was created specifically to address that problem, right? How do we catalyze, or how do we cook with the very fine ingredients in this ecosystem that exist here? And so what we found is, because the culture is so collaborative, and because we have so many talented young people, right, we can create a number of teams at a cost that is unheard of in America. and we can give them resources and advantages, right, that would simply be uneconomical in the States. For example, what we do, and this our model is a hybrid or somewhat unstandard, is we go to the very earliest stages, right? We don't screen teams and then give teams the best resources. We go to the very beginning, and we recruit online, through universities, through corporations, and we find talented people that can build cool products. We put them onto teams, so we create the teams. And in many cases, we also give them the idea. The ideas we source from local corporations, so somewhat of a venture studio model. And these local corporations, in turn, they commit to becoming, their trial customer for these teams. So in other words, we shorten the customer development, right? We help teams get their first customer, their first source of information on how to build their MVP, and that greatly shortens the amount of time required. Because I've started a few companies, and the first customer is always the most difficult. You call 20 companies, you beg for a trial, and you learn from that trial, et cetera, et cetera. So we try to we try to bring existing resources together in a cohesive way. And what this allows is we can create new teams very rapidly at a very low cost, and then we provide value to everyone in the process. For example, a lot of corporations, they have a lot of problems here, right? And then I tell them, look, you have a lot of different business processes, you have a lot of issues, and you have a lot of opportunity that you don't have time to address, right? Don't give me a mission critical, a business critical, use case. Give me, say, I will create a program that can recruit influencers for you, or give me I will create a program that will help you speed up your sales process by connecting, building a basic CRM connected to VoIP. Or, like, hey, your company doesn't have the time, cost or expertise to implement BI or Tableau. We can, instead of paying a foreign corporation or foreign consulting company, a minimum of $50,000. Right, $50,000. I've checked, and $50,000 is the minimum contract size these consulting companies will take. Typically, it's much more, 100K plus. And I say, okay, give me 10% of that. Right, give me a tiny fraction of that. Give me 90% off. Right, instead of hiring a foreign consulting company with a big expensive brand, use that fraction of a money, right, to support a local startup, to support your local coders, local developers, and your local entrepreneurs. And we will turn that problem into a new company, right? Like, granted, like, these teams are new and they're inexperienced, and will probably take more time to build something for you. But at the same time, you're getting this 90% off, right? And like, at the same time, like, you are supporting the ecosystem, in your home country,
right? So the industry, the verticals that you are focusing on currently,
there are so many fascinating models that could be implemented here. It's one thing I love about Uzbekistan. Whereas in the States, unless you're already a huge established players with a mountain of cash behind you, right, the cost of entering any market with existing competition is just massive, right? In the U.S., entrepreneurs generally have to say either we have something very new, create an entirely new market, or we focus on an extremely focused and niche market, right, where we have a distinct edge over a reduced amount of competition. Whereas Uzbekistan is, it's wide open. You can explore much bigger ideas. You can test new concepts, in a way that doesn't require a mountain of capital behind you. And, just looking at my current teams, just yesterday we assigned teams to a lot of promising ideas. Say, group buying, right? Imagine teams going to different apartment buildings, right, and organizing group buying purchases, right, combined with BNPL loans, and essentially you can get massive discounts on goods, right? Like, because essentially what you're doing, you're buying directly from the manufacturer, and you are skipping the entire logistics chain straight to the consumer, right? And you are organizing that demand for the manufacturer. It's the same business model as Pinduoduo in China, right? Which is a massive company, right? So that's just one idea. Another idea could be, say, like a simple, right? Say an AI advisor for new mothers, right? New mothers have a lot of stress, right? Because they have to take on a huge responsibility. And imagine the health outcomes you can improve if the mother could ask, hey, this is what I fed my baby. This is what my baby weighs, right? These are the milestones of my baby. What should I feed my baby? What medicine should I give it, right? And right away, a platform like that, right? Connect that platform to doctors, hospitals, medicines, right? The AI advisor can say, like, okay, every day, right? What time did the baby wake up, right? How much did the baby weigh, right? The improvement in health outcomes, right, for babies, right? That would be something, something like one of our teams is working on that now, right? And imagine the data you would get from that. You could track, if you got a big enough user base, right? You immediately have the ability to track how entire countries' infants are being grown, right? So that's an idea that really has legs, right?
Talking about the scope of the projects, are you kind of mostly looking inwards or outwards, like the coverage of the project, potential geographies?
So one of the most exciting things I like about Swift Launch is that we designed it to be modular, in the sense that it's a lot of work now, but the good thing about it is that all the things we're working on right now to stand up and get established only needs to be done once. No matter how many cities we're in, no matter how many countries we're in, right? Our class system, our online recruiting system, right? Our curriculum, etc., our training system, our mentor system. I mean, yes, it's a lot of work to organize and establish, but once it's done, right? You just cut and paste, right? So I fully intend that to expand this model across to multiple cities, possibly countries as well, and we actually get really interesting network and data effects because of the flexibility of our model. We assign the teams, we assign the ideas. And essentially what happens is that I describe it to my teams as, finding a business partner is like getting married, finding a wife or finding a partner. And everyone at the beginning of the program is just dating, right? And what's really interesting is we're currently developing software that allows our business coaches to grade and track our teams over 8 months, a long period of time. Our software then extracts this data and will create a dashboard that is available to our partner VCs, our partner investors, etc. And if this model exists in multiple cities, essentially what you have from the VC point of view, from the investor point of view, is a testing machine. What ideas get traction in customers in multiple cities, multiple countries, in real time? And then, that also serves as an incentivizing function for our team, because at the end of the program, we select the best entrepreneurs. We ask them, like, okay, we've done part-time entrepreneurship for 8 months. We now have enough revenue to pay salary. Will you commit? Will you get married? Right? And we offer them equity in a new corporation where we put all the technology and we put all the customers.
Right. Could you also expand on the selection criteria for Swift Launch?
So this is a particularly Californian way to look at it, but it is what it is. Our average applicant is typically someone, a few years out of university, working at a corporate job and dreaming of their own company with passion and drive. However, that being said, that's just the average. All right, we have a very wide range in our talent pool. Everyone from the wonder kid, 16-year-old, to the 40-year-old, right? Who has incredible business contacts. So we have a wide range. And when I present on Swift Launch at different events and speeches, I say, I don't care who you are, right? I don't care where you're from, right? I don't care what city you're from, who your parents are. I only care that you are hungry and you can get results and that you can learn. That's the only thing I care about. And so far, it's been fantastic. I think when people are unrestrained, right, in their ability to take charge of their future, they do incredible things. Mm-hmm. So that's our typical profile.
Right. Do you have any plans to address the skills gap in terms of necessary competencies in startup ecosystem of Uzbekistan? Do you look at also like the possibilities of attracting foreign players or foreign expertise rather into Uzbekistan?
Definitely. Yes, that's a big part of our model. One thing or two things that we're doing is that we create some events. CSpace hosts them, Impact hosts them, Aloqa may host them as well. And we have two kinds of events. One type of event is we invite local entrepreneurs to speak candidly, off the record, and we don't allow recordings. The other kind of event is I've reached out to my personal network, to Sturgeon's network, and to other VCs networks. And essentially, we have these virtual seminars where we mirror my phone to a big screen in an auditorium, a FaceTime call. And essentially, it's actually a surprisingly effective model where, I walk around the crowd, I pass around my phone, and, the people in the crowd can interact with people from Google, from Meta, from Amazon, and ask these experts directly where they think technology and the ecosystem is going. Mm-hmm. So ideally, once we're a little bit more established, I can bring these experts physically here. Mm-hmm. But at this point, right now, we're actually doing fairly all right with a virtual model.
Right. What other critical components do you think we should leverage from more established markets like mm-hmm. U.S., Europe?
I would say there are two, at least in my experience and opinion, is that there are two clear gaps. One is on the business strategy side, which me and our business coaching are hoping to address, because I've advised a lot of teams here, and one common mistake is that these teams get very passionate the first 2 months, right? First 2-3 months, and they go crazy. They try to do everything at once. They're pulling crazy all-nighters, right? They're doing everything right, and that effort, the amount of effort they have, isn't focused. Right, and what happens is they don't catch any traction after a few months. They don't catch any revenue or customers, and then after a few months they're discouraged, they're burnt out, and they kind of say, okay, yeah, they kind of give up. So we try to address that with disciplined coaching, where I say, don't give me 80-hour weeks, don't give me 100-hour weeks. Give me, your team can have a focused amount of time that we keep focused for 8 months. All right, so that's one way to address that. So the entrepreneurial mindset, right, where we figure out how do we be smart about our time and our effort, right, where we try to say okay, figure out what we need, prioritize those needs, organize a system that those needs can be addressed in a calculated and efficient manner. That type of entrepreneurial thinking is something we want to grow here. Mm-hmm. The second part is a little bit more technical, or it's I've seen and it's incredible. It's so encouraging that in the most booming industry in Tashkent in Uzbekistan is education. Right? I walk down the street, I see English centers, I see coding centers, I see academies, pretty much sprouting everywhere. So we see a large booming group of coders and programmers. The next step right? The slot that's missing and is just starting to be addressed now is how do you take a programmer and turn them into a developer, right? Someone that can manage the process, right? I'm not just making, a Tetris clone or a Hello World program. How do I go to the next step and actually say, how do I build an IT solution, right? Given what a company needs, given a company's problems, right? So, for example, that bridge between the business user or the end user and the coder, the translation between requirement and product, that part is still missing. But I've met players here who are like addressing that problem, like even as we speak, with fairly incredible training programs. But that's still a component that's still kind of missing, the managerial side, right? The process side, right? Because now we have a lot of coders that can code, but don't know, say, how do we manage a team of coders and business analysts and project managers to take all this skill and effectively apply it to a business problem.
Right.
So that component is still undeveloped.
Right. Yeah. That's real world situations are the best place to be for the startup founders. Really, addressing the pain point, challenge statements. I would also like to take a perspective on the possible strategic steps that Uzbekistan take to raise the international profile of Uzbek startup ecosystem and the overall Central Asian startup landscape.
Okay. That is a big question. And let me, I would say some of the most critical ones I think would be to help introduce market principles into the way funding and resources are allocated. That is, I think, one of the clearer issues, although I think it's probably beyond my wheelhouse on how that would be done. Because, like I said earlier, all the pieces are here, right? If I'm if I'm in a restaurant, right, trying to cook something, if I want to make the world's best burger, right, all the pieces are there. You have the best meat, you have the best bun, you have everything you need to make an incredible burger. The problem right now is all those pieces are separate now, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing's doing the combining. And that's kind of where Uzbekistan is now. It's right at the inflection point where if it gets a couple key things right, I think it can go really far.
What specific steps would you recommend the Uzbek startup landscape players to take to attract foreign venture capital?
So that is a problem near and dear to my heart because it is. I see it as part of my job, mm-hmm. because I am in the middle of trying to convince ecosystem players to come to Uzbekistan. Had meeting with a couple of virtual accelerators, incubators in America, in Silicon Valley, and from Berkeley actually. And I'm also trying to talk to some, European players to come take a look at Uzbekistan. And yeah, actually, there's some, and I think the VCs and the investors and the players that come to Uzbekistan, that come to Central Asia and take a look, are one step ahead of the curve because they are the players that are looking past the stereotype, that are cutting through the surface of things to get to substance. People like Sturgeon Capital in particular, right? They understand the incredible potential within Central Asia, and other players are, I believe that Domino is taking a look at, from Turkey is taking a look at Central Asia as well. And how Uzbekistan responds to these early feelers, I think, it's kind of like going to somebody's house party for the first time, right? You don't really know the person, but first impressions, can be wrong, but you walk into the house, right? And you're kind of looking around, and people are like, okay, what am I in for, right? And I think Uzbekistan, the heart of the matter is I've seen I've seen few places as hospitable as Uzbekistan. So I think that Uzbekistan can manage this process quite well if it does so in a strategic way, right? Whereas in, get resources to the right players who are doing this job for Uzbekistan, right? Make sure those resources are going to people that will get results with them, right? And I think the private sector, despite the fact that it has relatively limited resources, is doing an incredible job with what it has, right? There are private sector players here who are extremely creative, right? Extremely resourceful, and getting things done, right? Mm-hmm. Despite regulatory challenges, despite a lot of hurdles that they overcome anyway.
What regulatory changes do you expect to be introduced for the growth of the startup ecosystem?
Oh goodness. So regulatory policy is a complicated subject, and my background is primarily within the private sector. I would say enable, or at least do not be so restrictive to new fintech players, right? Because if legacy structures in the finance industry are unadaptive, then at least if you're not going to make that sector more flexible, then at least don't stop the new players, right? At least don't stop the new emerging fintech players, right? And allow them to fix the problem, mm-hmm. right? And don't cut yourself off at the knee, mm-hmm. right? So that might be one issue. Mm-hmm. The other issue I would say is more well thought out market-based principles and how the country's resources can be distributed or allocated and tied to results, right? So I think that would be a great step forward as well. And other stuff I would say is improve the brand of Uzbekistan. That's like, speaking as someone that has tried to pitch Uzbekistan overseas, right? There is a big optics problem that Uzbekistan and Central Asia as a whole, to be honest, they need to crack that problem, crack the optics, because the modern world is just a massively oversaturated information market. Right, the typical American since childhood has been over-advertised to, right? To separate yourself from the noise, right? You have to crack that problem in a clever way, and that's just the American's perspective. All right, I can't say with authority for say other markets or Europe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure, that's great. What else? Mm-hmm. Do you have any? Ideas that we can kind of add to the conversation to make it more, interesting, informative? What issues do you want us to kind of add?
Okay, sure. So, I was on a previous interview and asked a similar question about regulatory policy, and I think. I have a lot of respect for regulators because they have a very difficult problem, and doing well at that problem typically doesn't result in reward, right? Yeah. So they themselves have a very tricky and very difficult situation because good regulators, if they make good regulation, right, prevent catastrophe, but no one realizes it. right? No one ever gets rewarded.
They perceive it as obstacle in most cases.
Right. So the personal incentive, like it's very hard to be a good regulator because you're generally not rewarded for doing a good job, right? So I definitely sympathize with that situation, but I do think that it's also a critical job with massive importance, because it determines so much opportunity cost, right? No one cries for the businesses that weren't created because no one knew that they would ever exist, right? No one cries for the jobs that weren't created because no one knew they would ever exist, right? Like, they only cry when jobs are destroyed. They cry when companies go bankrupt. But the opportunity cost of things that could have been, right, that depends a huge amount on regulatory policy. And so in my last interview, the way I described it is that government or regulatory policy is, they're not carpenters building a house, right? And the government typically shouldn't be trying to do these things directly. What I've noticed in many countries that succeed quite well is that the regulators are gardeners. You're not carpenter trying to build a house. You are a gardener trying to create an optimal environment that aligns incentives, right? That allows entrepreneurs to succeed and be rewarded for succeeding, right? So to be a gardener as opposed to a carpenter.
What recommendations do you have for the Uzbek founders or wannabe founders?
If I only had one recommendation, I would say just start, right? Just do it, to steal from Nike. Because the longer you think about it, right, the less likely it'll happen, right? Just start. Don't fall in love with your idea, right? Ideas are supposed to suck at the beginning, right? Because you will change them and according to what you discover in the market. You don't invent a great idea. You evolve it, and you do it by learning and testing in the market.
That takes us to the next question. What are the common pitfalls that you've come across in Uzbekistan?
Common pitfalls. So the one is the earlier one I said was teams. They take on a massive amount of work that doesn't have high return. So that would be one thing. So being focused and disciplined with your time and effort. The second one, calls back to what we said about funding. One of the incredible advantages of this market is that the cost of testing an idea is incredibly low, which is one reason why Swift Launch can do so many teams. But the flip side of that is the country is capital starved, right? Which is why it's low. I saw one fantastic team about a year ago. They were doing 3D modeling for real estate development, right? They had had potential customers lined up. They had a cool product ready to go, and the entire project died because they couldn't get $700 for a camera.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now here's a difficult question for you. Where would you which one of these two problems would you prioritize? Lack of smart ideas or lack of capital?
I would say, well, both are significant issues, but both can be addressed. The lack of ideas is starting to be addressed because, that's one of that's why Swift Launch exists.
Right.
Right. We literally create a long list of ideas that we test, right, and source from corporations and overseas, and we give them the teams that we create. So that's one source. The capital, it's tricky because we are, for the most part, we are sourcing primarily from local funding sources, which is tricky because, in a perfect world, I'd be fundraising overseas, but the convincing foreign capital of the Uzbekistan market right now is still very difficult, right? Essentially, I have to rely on personal connections, personal relations, etc. And so until Uzbekistan builds that stronger brand, that's the local funding market is primarily where we'll be sourcing from. Although we're trying to change that. Both are significant issues, but both the ideas and the training and the education one, that's a big problem, but it's a fixable problem, right? The idea of foreign funding, the foreign branding of Uzbekistan among foreign funders, that will take longer to fix. Like there are ways to fix the problem, but it's a long-term problem, right? Because you have to remember the brands. I mean, how old is the Coca-Cola brand, right? Right. That took decades and decades to build, right? But how long has Uzbekistan been building its brand in the foreign market? Maybe 6 years. Right, so it's a brand is a long-term asset, and Uzbekistan has just started to build it. So that will be it's a critical problem to fix, but it is it is a long-term problem that'll take a longer period to fix.
How about the sophistication of the educational system in, say, just particularly speaking in the startup ecosystem? The level of sophistication stands at stark contrast with what we can come across in Silicon Valley, for example. Do you think that issue, is there any kind of specific ways you think we can bridge that gap?
That is another primary reason why Swift Launch exists. Essentially, when I first came to Central Asia, and keep things in context, the amount of difference I've seen in 10 years in the level of sophistication and the quality of development is stunning in Central Asia, right? When I first came to Central Asia, right, I taught entrepreneurship classes. To my knowledge, I was the only one using a lean model, right, where students had to form teams and teams had to form businesses. I graded them on the business, and that has changed significantly in many parts of Central Asia, right? When I first got to Central Asia, I tell people, build an MVP, iterate your product, test your customers and develop your customers, and people will say, what's an MVP? So, but whereas here, right, people what needs to be known. People now know what needs to be known. So there is a big significant difference. And it's also fascinating because a lot of the young people that have traveled abroad for an education have returned. The diaspora is returning. And they're bringing their expertise and their ideas with them as well. What has worked overseas, right? They're learning, they're leveraging the shoulders of giants. Essentially. So I think in terms of that being said, the education market is really interesting here. And I think it faces several challenges. Education in general is a very tricky market or a very tricky product because the customer, the user of education, the student, is not the customer, the payer. Right. And the normal feedback loop you have in a business where if you have good or bad quality, it leads to buyer not paying or, a person not buying or selling is only indirectly made in education. So the education programs I see, in training centers, right, that the pricing mechanism, the competitive effect, that's working quite well in training centers and training academies. Because you don't go there, you go there directly for the education. And if I go there and I'm not speaking English better, right, I find another English center, right? A coding academy, right? I go there, right? If I can't code, I know to find another coding center. Whereas I think the university system has different incentives and different rules, but that being said, that doesn't mean there's no competition. It's just that the normal effects of competition, right? The normal effects of the free market is more delayed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it says an incredible thing about Uzbekistan that education is the primary booming industry here, right? The incredible explosion of universities here, right, shows that there's incredible demand for education and self-improvement. That being said, I think the market for university degrees is probably due for a shake, like I guess, like a clearing function, right? Creative destruction. But I think the ultimate result will be in a higher quality educational system.
How are you addressing the high failure rate of startup cultures?
Oh yeah, so that's a question pretty close to me because I grew up in an immigrant family in America. So I grew up in a very conservative culture in the home, but a very liberal culture outside of it. So I can definitely relate to the fear and the apprehension of failure, especially when there's social considerations. That being said, right, some of my most educational experiences have been when I failed at building companies. And I think that this is a problem that is the responsibility of the older generation to fix, right? Because, like, for example, when I was 22, 23, raising capital in Silicon Valley, right, I would very normally call up very large companies, talk to the secretary of the CEO, and say, "Hi, I'm a new young entrepreneur. I have a great idea. Can I please, buy a cup of coffee for your CEO and chat for 30 minutes?" About half of them would say yes.
Wow.
Right, and I got a lot of great advice that way, right? But when I repeat that story here, like, people are like, "Yeah, that doesn't happen here," right? And the thing is that and that lends to a different problem I've seen here, right? I see very bright university students from top universities, and they have very cool projects, very cool startups, and when they graduate, they might get an offer from a very prestigious company like KPMG, and effectively, their parents are going to make sure they take that job offer from KPMG,
right?
And when you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, that's actually, economically speaking, quite a waste. Because there's no reason why, an incredible company, a very large corporation, can't just say, "Hey, you know what? You're good this year, right? You're very talented, qualified this year. You'll probably be very qualified next year, right? How about we keep your offer open for 1 year and you go try that startup." Right, you'll probably learn a lot of things that we can use, but because of those cultural expectations, right? Imagine 10 of those students, right? Imagine 10 of those students, and then 2 of those companies. Imagine how many future jobs were thus never created.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Stephen, thank you very much for coming.
Okay.
And
thank you so much for having me. I would love to be back. I think it's incredible what what your company has done. It's incredible what RS has done, and this is, I think, a great podcast.
thank you.
Thank you so much.